Those were the days.
Hey everyone, I'm Justin Lee Harald here with another edition of Those Were the Days Extended. Today I'm taking you back to November 8th, 2011. This was the wedding day of Maggie Horton to Victor Kiriakis. And very much like their relationship, this wedding day started off a bit rocky before our eventual conclusion. And at the time, there was this huge storm in Salem happening, and it stopped a lot of family and friends, especially extended family and friends, from coming into this wedding. It also stopped the caterer. It held up the officiant, and this all seemed like this was one big sign, at least to Maggie, that maybe to Maggie and Victor, actually, that maybe they were rushing into things. Maybe they needed to take a little bit more time, but Maggie decided to prevail through and decided that the one thing that she did want, despite all the chaos and craziness, was that she wanted to be Mrs. Victor Kiriakis at the time. So they, in fact, did get married that day with Daniel, her son, walking her down the aisle. But because of that, I want to take a little bit of a walk down memory lane for this relationship because I think it's one of the most interesting that we've had in Salem in the last few years, especially for the older generation. And we're going to start with, of course, we all know that Maggie was in one of the most successful loving marriages in Salem when she was married to Mickey Horton for decades. Now, this marriage did have its fair share of issues over the years, everything from amnesia to paralysis to infertility to Maggie's alcoholism. And then the later years, of course, we had the Salem Stalker storyline. And of course, a big thorn in their side towards the tail end of their marriage was Bonnie Lockhart. But nonetheless, they experienced a very loving sort of. They were considered sort of the perfect couple in Salem, especially in the Horton family, and a marriage that everyone sort of looked up to and aspired to until, unfortunately, Mickey, passed away in 2010. Now, at this time, it was sort of like a question of, okay, what's going to happen with Maggie? Are we going to see more of her? Is she going to get to sort of take center stage now? She has this sort of grieving storyline. And then they actually introduce Victor Kiriakis into it, which was a shock to everyone, I think, involved. They sort of had Victor coming around, sort of lending a shoulder for Maggie to cry on and being in just a really good friend to her, which in some ways very uncharacteristic as Victor, but also showed that different side of him, a side that I think we recognize that he did have with a lot of his partners, especially Caroline in the beginning there. But yeah, so now we have a grieving Maggie, a widow, sort of entertaining Victor's friendship here. What also brought them a little bit closer was at the time Philip and Melanie were getting married. And of course, Philip is Victor's son. And at the time, Melanie was a pseudo granddaughter for Maggie. The two characters sort of came together. They took a liking for each other. I think Melanie was in desperate need of a mother figure, and Maggie sort of played that role. And at one point, she even moved in after Mickey passed. She moved into their house and sort of lived with Maggie for a while. So them planning, sort of Victor and Maggie planning this wedding, sort of brought them a little bit closer together. What it also did was put her in the crosshairs of Vivian Alamain, who at the time did not like, who at the time was married to Victor, marriage of convenience, but did not like the fact that Victor was getting close and forming a friendship with Maggie Horton. So in typical Vivian fashion, she wanted to get rid of Maggie and pull out a trick from one of her old bags of tricks, which was to bury Maggie alive. Now, with the help of Victor and Brady, she was unsuccessful at that. They were able to turn the tables and actually bury Vivian alive. And all that sort of worked itself out at the end with Victor divorcing Vivian, sending her on her way, and actually begin dating Maggie. So they're off to sort of this crazy, weird start here. And then that brings us to actually September of 2011, where Victor popped the question to Maggie. She very enthusiastically said yes, and they agreed to get engaged. What also was happening was that Alice Horton had recently just passed. She, of course, was close with Maggie, and Hope discovered a letter that Alice had written reminding Maggie that when she was younger, her and Mickey participated in this experimental fertility program, sort of fertility project that was going on at the hospital. That storyline, of course, led to the fact that Maggie's eggs, unfortunately, were harvested against her will, and it sent her on this sort of wild goose chase to find out what happened with the results of that project and what happened, what were the results of what happened back then. That led us to the realization that Daniel Jonas was, in fact, Maggie's biological son, therefore making Melanie her biological granddaughter. Now, a little behind the scenes here, the reason this came about is not because the powers that be were looking to sort of give Maggie another child or to give her another family or to sort of usher her into the Kiriakis family with her own brood. What actually happened was that Suzanne Rogers and Molly Burnett were enjoying sort of their scenes together as Melanie and Maggie, and how the writers were putting them together and making Maggie sort of a pseudo grandmother for her. They actually liked them so much that they went to the powers that be, the producers, and they asked them if they can make their characters related. So at the time, it was already in the works that Carly was going to be Melanie's biological mother, and that Daniel, of course, would be her biological father. So in order to make them related, they needed to make Daniel Jonas Maggie's biological son. So that is actually how all that happened. It's sort of like reverse engineered. And so in that sense, not only did Suzanne and Molly get their wish of becoming a family, they actually moved Sean Christian into being Maggie's son and part of that family. So yeah, we had an expansion of Maggie's family as sort of she's starting this new life with Victor Kiriakis. Now that leads us to, again, walked us down the aisle. Victor and Maggie get married, and they hit their first hurdle and came actually a year later in 2012. And that hurdle was, it was revealed that Victor knew about Maggie's missing eggs, and that is actually that he actually orchestrated Daniel's conception and Daniel's birth, again, leading him to be Maggie's son. And what happened here is, if you remember, that Daniel came on the show, and he is the godson of Victor, and he is the son of Victor's oldest friends. What happened was they were experiencing fertility issues, and so Victor decided to step in and use his money and power, and he found a way to sort of get those missing eggs, harvest them, and then they used Daniel's quote-unquote mom as the surrogate to sort of bring him into the fold and with his conception. So that definitely did not sit well with Maggie, and it sort of set up this push and pull that eventually came to sort of identify their relationship over the next 10 to 12 years. It was Maggie eventually forgave him, of course, and they got back together, but it was this, again, push and pull of morality with both Maggie and Victor sort of sitting at both ends of the spectrum, I think. And I think that overall, I think people really enjoyed this this couple, this marriage. I wouldn't say, if you ask them each what their best pairings were, I don't know if they would say that it was with each other or if most fans would say that. But I think what it did was it brought Maggie sort of into the fold, because she, at that point, was very much in line to be the pseudo Horton matriarch. And it seemed like that's where they were sort of shifting her character. And it brought her into this completely screwed up Greek sort of pseudo former mob family, and set her up and made her character not darker per se, but put her in just in a whole new world that I think she wasn't used to, being a member of the Hortons and being married to Mickey. And I think what it did for Victor is it softened the character a lot. I think in his older age, we sort of had the benefit of Victor in these kind of crazy relationships that I think worked with like Kate and even his ones with Vivian. But I think in order to make him viable sort of going into his older age, I think they need to find a way to soften the character. And I think putting him with Maggie was, I think, the best thing that they could have done. Again, very opposites attract couple, very push and pull throughout the years, but I think it worked overall. And I think a lot of people liked this pairing. Like I said, it brought Maggie into a whole new area of the show. It also softened Victor a little bit, which I think he needed. But yeah, so I think overall this pair was a successful one. And as we see throughout this week, they've celebrated, they're still celebrating their anniversary, even though Victor is past a year, and they're still reaming from the ramifications of his death and his secrets and all of that. But I think it's a testament to how they set up this couple, this quintessential sort of opposites attract couple for the older generation and for them to introduce. And I think overall it was a hit and a win for both characters and for the show. So yeah, that was this week's episode of Those Were the Days Extended. Please check out our previous episode where I go down the Those Were the Days Extended for the month of October. Moving forward, I will be doing these videos sort of in sort of capsule storylines as the weeks go by. But yeah, hope you enjoyed.
Those were the